public schools. For many of us, they're the foundational building blocks of our communities, right? Places where young minds are nurtured, futures shaped.
Absolutely. But lately, these very institutions, well, they found themselves at the heart of some really intense national debates. They're becoming deeply contested spaces.
Exactly. It feels like it's no longer just about reading, writing, and arithmetic anymore.
No, not at all. These schools are emerging as kind of battlegrounds where education, deeply held values, and even, competing visions for society are clashing in ways we maybe haven't seen in quite a long time.
And that's precisely what this deep dive is all about today. We're going to unpack a whole range of recent controversies that have erupted across the United States. This isn't just about catchy headlines. It's really about understanding the specific flashpoints, the places where these broader tensions surface over what and how children are actually taught.
And we've drawn from a really diverse collection of sources for this, everything from official reports and public statements to detailed video transcripts. These cover incidents, from charter schools down in Atlanta, high schools out in California, local districts in Michigan.
It's really nationwide.
It truly is. It reflects this profound societal conversation that's happening right now.
Okay. So our mission today is to sift through all these various accounts. We want to identify the core issues, look at the specific actions taken by schools, teachers, students, parents.
And the underlying perspectives driving them.
Right. And we'll be maintaining an impartial lens throughout, just laying out what the sources say. The goal is to help you, our listener, gain a clear, well-informed perspective on these critical developments in public education.
Okay, let's dive in.
Let's unpack this. So that foundational role of public schools is clear, but wow, these debates show they've become incredibly charged spaces. Let's start by digging into the controversies directly related to what's being taught. The curriculum itself seems to be at the heart of so many disputes.
It really does. And we're seeing a rapidly evolving landscape, particularly when it comes to gender and sexuality education. California is a really prominent example here.
Okay, what's happening there?
Well, the California State Board of Education proposed mandatory instruction in what many critics are calling a, quote, radical sex and gender curriculum. Now, it's presented under the umbrella of health education.
Okay.
But its stated aim, according to those critics, is to promote transgenderism and actively encourage students to explore various gender options. Some sources even suggest the curriculum implies there could be like 15 or more possible genders.
15. That's a significant shift from, the traditional binary understanding.
It is.
And what's really striking is how early these ideas are being introduced. You mentioned kindergartners.
Right.
Ages 4 and 5?
Yes. The curriculum advises that, quote, gender socialization begins before children start school. And it suggests that even at this young age, students can, quote, begin to challenge gender stereotypes in a way that is age appropriate.
Wow. What does that look like in practice for kids that young? 4 years old.
Well, it's quite explicit. For instance, recommended books for kindergarten include one called My Princess Boy. It describes a young boy who likes to wear dresses, and his family accepts him. The source we looked at even notes the father telling the boy how pretty he looks in a dress.
Okay.
Then there's another book, Who Are You? The Kid's Guide to Gender Identity. This one apparently teaches there are at least 15 possible genders. It lists examples like boy, girl, both, neither, trans, genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, agender, neutroid, bigender, trigender, third gender, two-spirit.
That's a lot of terminology for kindergarten.
It is. And this book also reportedly claims it's impossible to determine a baby's gender at birth, which is, a biologically controversial statement.
And this framework, it progresses through the grades.
It does. As students move into upper grades, like 7th and 8th, the guidelines become even more expansive. The framework emphasizes the need to, quote, be inclusive of all students. It urges using gender-neutral language for relationships.
So what does that mean, practically?
Teachers are specifically advised not to assume gender pronouns based on birth sex or appearance. They recommend using singular pronouns like they, them, even for an individual.
Okay, using they, them as singular.
Right. And this extends to relationships, too. The recommendation is to use partner instead of boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband, wife. The idea is to avoid assumptions about gender or sexual orientation. It even suggests this term could include non-monogamous relationships.
Non-monogamous relationships mentioned in middle school health guidance.
That's what the source indicates, yes. And by high school, the mandate becomes teaching gender as a spectrum, not a binary fact. It says there are, quote, an infinite number of ways an individual may identify or choose to express their individuality and sense of self.
Infinite ways.
No.
Okay. Now, one of the big sticking points, and you mentioned critics earlier, seems to be around parental rights. What about opting out?
That's a major point of contention.
Hmm?
Brenda Lebsack, who's a public educator herself, raised serious concerns about this. She stated that parents, quote, are denied the ability to have their children opt out of these lessons.
How is that possible? Usually there are opt-outs for sex ed.
Well, she cites a specific part of the California Education Code 51932B. According to her reading, this code exempts instruction on gender identity or sexual orientation from the usual parental notice and opt-out requirements, as long as it doesn't specifically discuss reproductive organs.
Ah, so it's a specific carve-out in the law.
Exactly, which is why Lebsack was strongly urging the public to comment on the draft framework. It really gets to this core tension: parental rights versus the school's perceived mandate.
You can imagine the reaction. What kind of concerns were parents raising?
Oh, the discomfort was palpable, especially regarding how explicit some of the content was perceived to be. During public comment sessions, parents gave really impassioned testimonies.
Like what?
Well, one parent, for instance, accused the framework outright of promoting, in her words, child pornography. She mentioned specific topics she found deeply disturbing, like descriptions of certain sexual acts and references to body fluids being discussed in relation to sexual activities, things she felt were absolutely inappropriate for any school setting, let alone for children.
That's strong language. Were others echoing similar concerns about explicitness?
Yes, definitely. Another parent, Heather Gibson, brought up a book called Changing You. Now, this one was apparently recommended for removal later, but she pointed out it showed explicit images of intercourse targeted at 8-year-olds.
8 years old.
That was her claim. And she also criticized My Princess Boy, the one that wasn't recommended for removal, for showing, as she described it, a child checking their own genitals. She called that cartoon pornography.
So strong objections to visual materials as well.
Absolutely. And another parent, Kelly, mentioned a specific chapter, Chapter 6, delving into topics like BDSM, sex toys, and again, this body fluid or blood play concept. She also shared a negative personal experience involving Planned Parenthood from her own high school health class.
Okay. It seems like a pattern of concern about age appropriateness and graphic content.
And it wasn't just parents. Linda, a retired teacher, she detailed a progression. Masturbation introduced in grades 4-6, online resources for gender transitioning pointed out for 9 to 11-year-olds.
Transitioning resources for that age group?
That was her testimony, yes. And she also mentioned barrier method demonstrations, condoms, dental dams, using a penis model for 7th and 8th graders.
Beyond the explicit content, were there other types of concerns? Psychological, maybe?
Yes, definitely psychological and developmental concerns. One mother, Donna, spoke very simply, asking the board to just leave so many of these issues out of kindergarten. She felt young children just lack the comprehension. It speaks to that fundamental disagreement about what kids are ready for.
And were professionals weighing in?
Yes. We saw testimony from David LeBron, who holds a PhD in clinical psychology. He claimed that, in his view, only the gay community, trans community, support this curriculum. He cited other experts like Michelle Cretella from the American College of Pediatrics, who was controversially called gender affirmation institutional child abuse. He also mentioned Polly McHugh from Johns Hopkins, who has described transgenderism as a psychosocial problem.
So bringing in dissenting expert opinions there.
Right. And the concerns weren't just medical or psychological, but also cultural. America Figueroa, who identified as a Mexican immigrant mother, felt the framework, despite claiming inclusivity, was actually, quote, exclusive to a small community and excludes those of us from cultures with strong values. She called it the sexualization and corruption of an entire generation.
Powerful words. It really underscores the deep value clashes at play.
It really does. And what's fascinating connecting this to the bigger picture is how broad the definition of health education seems to have become here. It's moving beyond biology and hygiene into shaping a child's very understanding of self, identity, relationships, often in ways that challenge long-held norms.
It certainly expands the scope of what we traditionally think schools are there to teach.
Massively. And the implications aren't just for students and parents. They extend to teachers, too. Remember Brenda Lebsack, the educator. She feared this framework could, quote, jeopardize thousands of teachers' jobs.
Why? Because they might refuse to teach it.
Exactly. Because they may be forced to teach concepts that go against their conscience. And we've seen related instances play out, like a middle school teacher in Florida. She identified as pansexual and asked students to create art expressing their sexuality, including things like trans flags. She was ultimately fired.
On what grounds?
The school deemed it inappropriate and said it was against the law in the state of Florida, likely referring to Florida's parental rights in education law. It just highlights that tension between a teacher's personal expression, their professional role, and evolving state laws and school policies.
Okay, so that covers the gender and sexuality aspect, but you mentioned these clashes are broader. What about issues of race, identity, and social justice in the curriculum?
That's another major area, absolutely. And here, the very definition of equity often becomes a central flashpoint. We're seeing significant pushback against things like white privilege training and equity workshops for educators.
Like the Minnesota Educator Academy, the MEA, that event drew some attention.
It did. The MEA is sponsored by the state's teachers union, and some sources described it as an indoctrination boot camp. A key figure there was the keynote speaker, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., who co-founded the Privilege Institute.
And what was his message?
He drew a sharp distinction between equity and equality. His definition focused on equity, meaning equal results, whereas equality is about equal opportunity. And he argued that our school systems are inherently, quote, privileged towards whites.
So focusing on outcomes rather than just access.
Precisely. And the breakout sessions reflected this. They had titles like anti-bias education and training for racial equity advocates. These advocates were explicitly described as being trained to demand equity or equality of results, not equality of opportunities. The overarching message was clear. Racial justice work is the work of all of us.
And these concepts, they're not just staying in teacher training, are they? They're making their way into student assignments.
Directly. Take Saratoga Springs, New York. In a high school business class, students were given these privilege reflection forms.
Privilege forms in business class, how did that work?
It was a point system. Students would add 25 points for being white, another 25 for being male, but then they subtracted points, 100 for being black, 50 for female, 150 for gay, and a huge 500 points subtracted for being transgender.
Wow. Quantifying privilege and marginalization like that.
And it didn't stop there. Religion was scored too. Plus 25 for Jewish, plus 5 for Christian, but negative 50 for Muslim. It even got into appearance and disability, subtracting points for being overweight or disfigured or even using the term retarded, though the district later acknowledged that word was insensitive.
You can imagine parents' reactions.
Oh, yeah. One parent, Michelle King, called it absolutely offensive and appalling. The district did admit the insensitive word should have been removed, but notably, they didn't seem to condemn the exercise itself, just the language used. It highlights that ongoing debate about whether these kinds of exercises are appropriate at all.
And this isn't an isolated case, right? There was something similar in California with younger kids.
That's right. Cupertino, California. Third graders, 8- and 9-year-olds at R.I. Meyer-Holt Elementary were asked to rank themselves based on power and privilege.
Third graders, how did they even approach that?
It involved creating an identity map, listing their race, class, gender, religion, family structure, things like that. Then, the teacher reportedly explained to them about a, quote, dominant culture of white, middle-class, cisgender, educated, able-bodied Christian English speakers who created and maintained this culture in order to hold power.
That's quite a complex socio-political analysis for 8-year-olds.
It is. And apparently this lesson took place during math class. They also used a book called This Book is Anti-Racist, which teaches that people with privilege, quote, have power over others.
So what were the kids asked to do with their identity maps?
They were told to deconstruct their own intersectional identities, basically. Look at how their different identity categories overlap, and then circle the identities they possess that supposedly hold power and privilege.
How did parents react to that?
Outrage. One parent was quoted saying it was teaching racism to my 8-year-old. The school administration did agree to suspend that specific program after the pressure, but it really exemplifies the kind of instruction that's causing concern about divisiveness.
Then there's the whole Black Lives Matter at School Week initiative. That seems broader than just one assignment.
It is. It's a national initiative, usually held in February. It's promoted by groups like edjustice.org, which is linked to the National Education Association, and it's supported by teachers' unions in many major cities.
And the goal, is it just about Black history?
Well, the sources we reviewed clarify that proponents see it as complementing Black History Month, but critics argue its purpose goes further, aiming to, quote, indoctrinate students in radical leftist concepts.
What kind of concepts are we talking about?
The initiative is guided by the 13 guiding principles of the Black Lives Matter global movement, and these get woven into the curriculum. Some examples include queer affirming, which is described as working towards a network where, quote, heteronormative thinking no longer exists.
Heteronormative thinking, the assumption that heterosexuality is the default.
Exactly. Another principle is Black villages, which is explained as the, quote, disruption of Western nuclear family dynamics, and a return to a more collective village model. Then there's restorative justice, promoted as a, quote, leftist alternative to traditional policing and courts.
Disrupting the nuclear family, that seems like a very significant social goal to be teaching in schools.
It's definitely a departure from traditional civics. And the curriculum examples show how broadly these ideas are applied. There's a book called Teaching for Black Lives, with essays on things like rethinking Islamophobia, combating bigotry, building resistance.
Okay.
Math lessons might focus on economic injustice, maybe analyzing credit card debt in the Black community. Science lessons could cover environmental justice or climate-induced injustices.
So reframing traditional subjects through a social justice lens.
Precisely. It really shifts the focus from purely academic content towards social commentary and activism. And consider this, for the youngest kids, pre-K to second grade, there's a lesson cited on transgender and non-binary identities, using the book I Am Jazz.
About the young trans girl, Jazz Jennings.
Yes. And the lesson plan specifically instructs teachers to modify a phrase in the book. Instead of saying boy body, they're told to say doctors thought she was a boy.
That's a subtle but significant change in language.
It is. It signals a very proactive approach to shaping children's understanding of identity, going beyond just acknowledging difference.
This reevaluation of narratives, it seems to extend to history teaching, too.
Absolutely. In Loudoun County, Virginia, for example, there's a new curriculum for kindergartners focusing on slavery and social justice. It was developed in partnership with the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC.
And the aim of this curriculum?
According to critical sources, the aim is to paint America in a highly negative light, directly linking slavery to current injustices and encouraging activism and action civics among these young students.
Kindergarten activism, how do teachers react?
Well, one anonymous elementary teacher there expressed concern that it divides people and incites hate. She felt it was teaching concepts like whiteness and blackness at an age where kids really lack the maturity for that kind of historical context.
Any other perspectives on that?
Education policy expert Max Eden offered his view, suggesting the goal is to instill a specific political narrative, akin to the 1619 Project's perspective, basically teaching that America is evil from a very young age.
And this isn't just about U.S. history in general. Native American history teaching has also become controversial.
Yes, in Washington state, there's a new mandatory curriculum called Since Time Immemorial. Critics claim it's designed to, quote, elicit students' emotions and provoke their anger, sometimes using what they call shock tactics.
Shock tactics, like what?
One exercise described involves a teacher asking a student to draw something they consider a sacred space. Then the teacher rips off a piece of the drawing and asks, "What's the big deal? I only took part of it." The aim is to simulate how tribes felt when land was taken.
That does sound emotionally provocative.
It does. The curriculum also reportedly suggests comparing the struggles of Native American nations to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which promotes a view of Israel as a colonizer, a highly contentious perspective.
Other examples?
There's a reenactment described based on a poem called Friend of the Indians. A teacher playing the historical figure Red Jacket apparently pushes a student off a chair to symbolize white settlers telling natives to move.
Pushing a student, physically.
That's how the source described the reenactment, yes. And perhaps even more controversially, some videos approved for classroom use reportedly challenge scientific consensus on migration, claiming tribes have no migration story because we were created here.
How are parents and educators reacting to this curriculum?
We found input from Joshua Campbell, who's actually a student teacher. He found it too ideological and potentially harmful for elementary kids, calling it a groupthink idea that does lead to indoctrination. He felt young students just aren't equipped for the complex, multi-perspective thinking required. It really highlights that ethical tightrope schools walk when teaching painful histories.
Okay, so beyond these broader curriculum themes, gender, race, history, are there examples of more direct, maybe partisan political bias in materials?
Yes, definitely. We found examples of textbook endorsements and clearly slanted narratives. In California, a first-grade social studies textbook reportedly glorified Gavin Newsom, who was then a Democratic candidate for governor.
Glorified him how? In a first-grade textbook?
It included a large photo of him with a bold red heading, Gavin Newsom Champion for People's Rights. It praised his support for gay marriage. Jonathan Keller from the California Family Council slammed it as political propaganda. He found it outrageous to place Newsom alongside figures like Washington, Lincoln, and Martin Luther King Jr., and said it blatantly smeared the beliefs of many families.
And this isn't just at the elementary level.
No. In Minnesota, an advanced placement AP history textbook by the people, A History of the United States, written by NYU professor James W. Frazier, drew fire for his portrayal of Donald Trump.
What does it say?
It described Trump's, quote, not very hidden racism, and categorized his supporters as a mostly older, often rural or suburban, and overwhelmingly white group. The text even went so far as to question Trump's mental instability.
That sounds less like historical analysis and more like opinion.
That's certainly how some saw it. Kara Snyder, a high school student who blew the whistle on this, felt the text skewed facts. She argued that learning should be objective. The book also apparently offered a negative portrayal of police in its discussion of the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really raises that crucial question again. When does teaching critical thinking about current events cross into just promoting one political viewpoint? That seems to be the heart of so many of these textbook and curriculum fights.
It absolutely is. It's a very blurry line, and many feel it's being crossed too often. And it's not just published textbooks, it's also teacher-created materials in classroom discussions. In South Carolina, a high school history class used a slide presentation that defined liberal with words like tolerant, generous, enlightened. Okay,
Right.
but then it defined conservative with terms like stingy, miserly, regressive, narrow-minded, reactionary, bigoted, prejudiced, biased.
Wow, that's not subtle at all.
Not in the slightest. And the slide even included American flags, making the political context unmistakable. The district later claimed there was no intent to indoctrinate, but parents were understandably outraged, with one saying, "I'm tired of these schools indoctrinating our kids."
Any other examples of teacher-led assignments causing controversy?
Yes, in Massachusetts, a high school assignment asked ninth graders to evaluate whether President Donald Trump exhibited 14 characteristics of fascism.
Fascism. For ninth graders comparing to the sitting president.
Yes, the list included things like rampant sexism and controlled mass media. Students were required to find evidence that Mr. Trump talks or behaves like a fascist, or evidence that he doesn't.
How did that go over?
Predictably, parents were furious. One was quoted saying, "This isn't what I'm sending my kids to school for." The school principal acknowledged the assignment missed the mark, but insisted it was meant to foster critical thinking, not be an attack. But again, it raises that question of neutrality.
Okay, so moving on from the curriculum content itself, let's look at teacher conduct in the overall school environment. This seems to be where personal beliefs really collide with professional boundaries. We're hearing about direct political expression from teachers, right?
Yes, numerous examples. And sometimes it involves direct denigration of political figures right there in the classroom. In Florida, a middle school teacher was reassigned after using a multiple-choice exam question that described one option as the 45th president, 2017 Republican real estate businessman, idiot,
And the answer was?
Donald Trump. Apparently, the question came from an online quiz database called Quizlet, but the teacher still chose to use it.
How did parents react?
A parent whose daughter took the quiz shared it online, calling it indoctrination, and insisting teachers' personal opinions do not belong in the classroom. Even Senator Rick Scott weighed in, tweeting the teacher should be fired immediately.
And this wasn't a one-off incident.
Sadly, no. In Texas, a biology teacher repeatedly bullied a student who supported Trump. She called him Trumpy in class and allegedly told the class, "I hate Donald Trump with a burning passion, and he's a complete douchebag."
That's incredibly unprofessional. Did it go further?
Yes, she apparently even suggested his political views made him less likely to ascribe to scientific reasoning about evolution. The student's mother demanded the teacher be terminated, saying politics need to stay out of the classroom, period.
And there was that Utah case that got a lot of attention, too.
Right, the chemistry teacher, Leah Kenyon. She was filmed during what was described as a left-wing political rant. In the video, she says things like, "I hate Donald Trump. Trump sucks. Tell students, most of y'all parents are dumber than you, and even if you don't believe in climate change, get the hell out."
Get out of her class.
That's what she said. She's no longer employed by that school district. Commentators pointed to incidents like these as evidence of a lack of transparency and accountability in classrooms.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. These aren't just subtle biases in lesson plans. These are really intense personal confrontations initiated by teachers expressing strong political opinions. It highlights that huge challenge, balancing a teacher's right to free expression, which they have outside school, with the need for a neutral learning environment inside the classroom, especially for kids who are still forming their own views.
Exactly. And sometimes this bias or perceived bias escalates into what parents see as direct retaliation against students for their political views.
That's a serious allegation. What kind of examples are there?
Well, in Michigan, at Mason High, a 16-year-old student wore a Women for Trump pin. A male teacher apparently saw it, aggressively grabbed the pin right off her jacket.
He grabbed it off her.
That's the report. He then allegedly put it upside down on his own shirt and said, "It belongs upside down." The student's mother was furious, stating he had no right to put his hands on my child over a pin or anything else. A police report was filed, though no criminal charges resulted. The teacher was disciplined internally.
Okay, another one.
Phoenix, Arizona. A mother got into a confrontation with the principal because her daughter was disciplined for wearing a Make America Great Again sweatshirt and also an American flag on American Flag Day. The situation escalated to the point where the mother was actually trespassed from the school, basically banned from the premises.
Banned for protesting the dress code enforcement.
That seems to be the case, yes. And in New York, remember the hero essay assignment? Sixth grader Bella Moscato wanted to write about Donald Trump.
Right, and the teacher objected.
Allegedly, the teacher said Trump spreads negativity and says bad stuff about women, rejecting him as a topic, while allowing another student to write about Barack Obama. Bella's father went public, challenging the superintendent, saying, "My daughter didn't lie. No one should make a child feel that way." Bella ended up writing the essay on Trump anyway.
Good for her. But these incidents, they really show how a teacher's personal politics can directly impact a student's experience and even their assignments. It makes you wonder how many students just stay quiet to avoid trouble.
That's a very real concern. And it brings us back to this issue of ideological stances and professional boundaries. It's one thing to teach about different views, but it's another when a teacher's own stance dictates classroom dynamics or policies. Sometimes this leads to teachers refusing to comply with school rules on moral or religious grounds.
Like the pronoun case in Virginia.
Exactly. Peter Vlaming, a French teacher at West Point High School, he was fired for refusing to use male pronouns for a biologically female student who identified as transgender.
Why did he refuse?
He cited his Christian beliefs. Now, he offered a compromise. He said he would use the student's new masculine name and just avoid using any pronouns for the student. But the school insisted. They demanded he use masculine pronouns in every context.
So no compromise was accepted.
Apparently not. His lawyer argued it was unconstitutional compelled speech, essentially forcing someone to endorse an ideology they don't believe in. What was interesting is that students actually rallied in his support. They staged a walkout, chanted, "Bring him back," held signs. One reportedly said, "Facts don't care about your feelings." It clearly divided the school community and raised huge questions about conscience rights versus school policy on gender identity.
And this challenging of norms extends even to national symbols sometimes.
It does. In Orange County, California, an 11th grade teacher named Kristen Pitson posted a video on TikTok. In it, she admitted she'd taken down the American flag in her classroom during the pandemic because, quote, "it made me uncomfortable." She also admitted she lied to students who asked where it was, telling them she was looking for it or it had been lost.
Why did she say it made her uncomfortable?
The source didn't specify her reasoning beyond that statement, but the school district reacted quickly, stating her actions do not align with the district's values and launching an investigation.
And didn't a school try to drop the Pledge of Allegiance entirely?
Yes, that was in Atlanta. The Atlanta Neighborhood Charter School decided to eliminate the pledge from its morning routine. They planned to replace it with a school chant, a wolf pack chant, arguing this would promote a more fully inclusive and connected community. The school president explicitly said the pledge was not part of a positive or inclusive start to the day.
How did that decision go over?
Not, well, nationally speaking, there was widespread criticism. The backlash was significant enough that the school quickly reversed course. The board chair called the initial announcement a miscommunication and reinstated the pledge. It shows how sensitive these symbolic issues remain.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still under the umbrella of teacher conduct and school environment. What about religious instruction or potential proselytizing? That's always a flashpoint in public schools.
A huge one. And we've seen strong objections recently, particularly regarding mandatory teacher training sessions focused on Islam in some districts, like in Michigan.
Mandatory training just on Islam.
That's what a Freedom of Information Act request revealed, yes. A group called the Thomas More Law Center reviewed the training materials and described them as Islamic propaganda. They claimed the materials glorified Islam while simultaneously disparaging Christianity. And significantly, there were apparently no similar mandatory trainings held for any other religion.
What specific claims were made in the training, according to the Law Center?
They alleged the training taught that Christian scriptures were corrupted, whereas the Quran contains the pure Word of God. It also reportedly presented Islam as the only purely monotheistic religion.
That sounds like promoting one religion over others, not just educating about it.
That was precisely the Law Center's argument. They also noted the instructor, Huda Essa, from a company called Culture Links LLC, taught that the word Islam means peace, whereas its literal meaning is generally understood as submission to God. And when discussing Allahu Akbar, she reportedly said it conveys strong emotions, but omitted its documented use as a battle cry by some extremist groups.
Were there other omissions alleged?
Yes. The Law Center claimed the training glossed over or omitted details about violence and the mistreatment of women in some Islamic countries. Their president called the whole thing an Islamic Trojan horse within our public school systems. It raises serious questions about neutrality and the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment.
Does this concern extend beyond teacher training into actual classroom assignments?
It does. In West Virginia, a middle school case ended up in a lawsuit. Pastor Richard Pankowski sued after his 13-year-old daughter was assigned to copy the Shahada, the Islamic Declaration of Faith. There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah.
Copy it. Why?
The assignment was supposedly for calligraphy practice, requiring her to write it out in Arabic script. But Pastor Pankowski alleged it went further. Other assignments reportedly included fasting for 24 hours to empathize with Muslims observing Ramadan and reading chapters from the Quran.
Did they cover other religions to the same extent?
Pankowski claimed they didn't. He alleged the school spent much more class time on Islam than on other world religions, and that when Christianity and Judaism were discussed, important aspects were stripped away. The lawsuit essentially argued it crossed the line from education into religious coercion.
And beyond curriculum or assignments, are there accusations of actual direct proselytizing happening during school hours?
Yes, there's a reported case from New Jersey at Memorial High School. The allegation is that the school allowed 2 Muslim students to go class to class during school hours, interrupting lessons, specifically to try and convert students to Islam under the guise of teaching them about Ramadan.
Interrupting classes to try and convert students. That seems highly unusual for a public school.
Extremely unusual. The school also reportedly hung banners for Ramadan, including one that read, "May Allah continue to shower you love and wisdom." Furthermore, these students apparently created massive bulletin boards promoting Islamic practices.
Were these student-led clubs or something?
According to the source, these activities were sponsored by the Dawah committee of their local mosque. Dawah explicitly means proselytizing or inviting people to Islam. So the group involved, the Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund, argued this was a clear violation, stating a public school district would never hang posters praying for Jesus Christ.
This raises that critical question again. Where is the line between teaching about world religions, which is generally accepted as part of a diverse curriculum, and actively promoting or proselytizing for one particular faith within a public school? The legal and ethical tightrope seems incredibly fine here.
It's incredibly fine and often contested. In all these examples, the curriculum battles, the teacher conduct issues, the religious instruction concerns, they feed into a much broader, more sweeping accusation we see in some sources, that public schools are essentially becoming indoctrination camps.
That's a strong term, indoctrination camps. Where's that coming from?
One source we looked at, titled "The Left's Attack on Our Public Schools," explicitly calls schools a war zone. It claims that, quote, left-wing radicals are targeting our public schools with a similar campaign to what they perceive has already happened in universities.
And what's the alleged mechanism for this attack?
The accusation is that these groups control key levers: teachers' unions, teacher training programs in universities, and textbook publishing companies. The goal, according to this view, is to instill what they call correct thinking on a whole range of issues, from white racism and the fluidity of gender to climate change.
Is there organized pushback against this perceived trend?
Yes. The David Horowitz Freedom Center, for instance, launched a campaign called Stop K-12 Indoctrination. Their stated principle is straightforward. Students should be taught how to think, not what to think.
Are there other voices making this indoctrination argument, maybe focusing on different aspects?
Yes. We saw commentary from a coach, Greg Adams. He argues public schools are indoctrination camps and points partly to teacher demographics. He notes that 93% of their primary school teachers are female, and 76% of the teachers that they're going to be around are female in high school.
Okay, but how does he connect demographics to indoctrination?
His argument, quite controversially, is that modern female teachers are often, quote, trained in the public school indoctrination camp themselves about how to make kids the victim. He claims they end up teaching victim studies instead of core academics.
That's a very broad and provocative generalization.
It is. He also criticizes teachers' unions, claiming their focus is on political demands, things like defunding the police, raising taxes on the wealthy, Medicare for all, rather than on improving education itself. It paints a picture of a system fundamentally driven by political agendas, not academic ones.
And this general sentiment that schools are straying is echoed by others, too.
Yes, quite strongly by public intellectuals like Jordan Peterson. He offers very direct advice to parents. He says if your children are in a class discussing topics like diversity, equity, inclusivity, gender, white privilege, then those children, quote, should be encouraged to leave the class because they're not being educated, they're being indoctrinated.
Leave the class entirely.
That's his recommendation. He stresses that parents absolutely must pay attention. They need to have a serious chat with your school, and if they resent what's being taught, they must be prepared to, quote, lay out a strategy of ideational war to fight back against what he calls the disempowering narrative of victimhood.
Ideational war. That implies the stakes are incredibly high.
That's clearly how he and others see it. The classroom has become a primary battleground for competing worldviews.
So let's try to synthesize this section. What does this all mean? We've gone from curriculum debates about health and history to specific teacher actions, political statements, religious issues, and now these broad accusations of indoctrination. It paints a picture of public education as the central battleground in our ongoing cultural conversations.
Absolutely. And it's clear the stakes feel incredibly high for everyone involved, students, teachers, administrators, and especially parents who feel their fundamental values and role in their children's upbringing are being challenged or undermined right in the classroom.
Okay, so given everything we've just discussed, this huge range and intensity of controversies, it's no surprise that we're seeing significant impacts and, importantly, responses from parents and communities. What does that pushback look like?
Well, a really consistent theme across almost all the sources is this sense of widespread outcry. You hear words like outrage, disgust, frustration from parents and community members who perceive indoctrination or deeply inappropriate content in their schools.
And how are they channeling that frustration? What specific actions are they taking?
It's quite varied. A common first step is contacting school administrators and board members directly. We saw that with the California health ed debates, the New York hero essay issue, the Texas teacher calling Trump names. Parents are going straight to the authorities.
Makes sense. What else?
Public exposure is huge. Parents are sharing information, photos of assignments, even videos of teachers on social media. Think about the Saratoga Springs privilege form, or the Florida Trump exam question, or that Utah teachers' rant. Social media amplified those incidents massively.
So bypassing traditional channels sometimes.
Exactly, and sometimes it gets more confrontational. We heard about parents directly confronting teachers or principals, like the mother in Phoenix over the Magi sweatshirt, or the mother in Michigan whose son's Trump pin was grabbed.
Does it ever escalate to legal action?
It does. People are filing police reports, as in the Michigan pin incident, though charges weren't pressed there. But actual lawsuits have been filed, like the one in West Virginia over the Islamic Creed assignment, or cases mentioned in Massachusetts regarding anti-Israel curriculum content. Engaging local media is another tactic to raise awareness.
And are parents organizing beyond individual complaints?
Yes, definitely. They're forming advocacy groups or joining existing campaigns. We mentioned the David Horowitz Freedom Center's Stop K-12 Indoctrination campaign earlier. There are also state-level groups popping up, like one called Education Without Indoctrination in Massachusetts.
It sounds like a real mobilization of parental concern.
It really does. What's fascinating here is just the sheer range of responses. It shows this growing level of vigilance, maybe even militancy, among some parents and community members. They seem determined to hold schools accountable. Connecting this to the bigger picture, it really suggests that many parents feel increasingly alienated or disempowered by an education system they perceive as drifting away from core academics and, perhaps more importantly, from their own values.
How do schools typically respond when faced with this kind of pushback? Are they receptive? defensive?
It varies, of course, but our sources suggest a pattern. Often, the initial public response from school districts involves statements that try to, well, manage the situation. They might issue apologies for insensitivity or acknowledge bad choices by a teacher, like in Saratoga Springs, or with an unrelated Ohio apocalypse assignment mentioned in one source.
But do they condemn the underlying issue?
Not always. Sometimes the focus is on procedural errors or poor judgment rather than the core pedagogical or ideological complaint. We also see instances where schools initially seem to deny the problem or stonewall parents, like in that Ohio case or the Massachusetts curriculum disputes, until pressure mounts.
And what about accountability for teachers when their conduct is the issue?
That can be complicated. There's often tension because teacher unions can make disciplinary actions, especially termination, a difficult and lengthy process. So it becomes this complex dance between parental demands for immediate accountability and the established institutional procedures and labor agreements. It really reveals the structural challenges in making swift changes, even when concerns seem valid to many.
Looking at the really broad implications of all this, it feels like these controversies are fundamentally reshaping the role of public schools in society, doesn't it?
I think that's undeniable. Schools are clearly moving beyond being solely focused on academic learning. They've become arenas, maybe even the primary arenas, where society grapples with its most complex and divisive social, political, and cultural issues. The very definition of education seems to be stretching, or maybe straining.
And that creates constant tension, right? You mentioned that line between teaching kids how to think versus what to think. How do schools navigate that?
It's incredibly difficult. Finding that balance between promoting diversity of thought, exposing students to different perspectives, and avoiding what many perceive as outright indoctrination is a massive challenge. There's no easy answer, and different communities draw the line in very different places.
And for teachers, it seems like a minefield.
It can be. There's that constant issue of freedom of speech versus professional neutrality. How does a teacher navigate expressing their own deeply held beliefs, which they have a right to hold, while maintaining a fair and unbiased classroom environment and adhering to professional codes of conduct? It's a tightrope walk, and the consequences for misstepping can be severe, as we've seen.
And underlying all of this is that fundamental question, who gets the final say?
Exactly. It's the ongoing debate over parental rights versus school authority versus sometimes student rights. Who ultimately has the primary influence over a child's education and moral development? Is it the parents, the professional educators, the democratically elected school boards, or maybe even the students themselves as they get older? There's no consensus.
It seems like these classroom controversies aren't just happening in schools. They're actually reflecting the deeper ideological divisions in our society, maybe even intensifying them.
I think that's fair to say. Public schools have become this microcosm of our broader societal struggles. The disagreements over values, history, identity, morality, they're all playing out with particular intensity when it comes to educating the next generation. Schools are truly at a crossroads.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener, and for the future of our public schools? It's clear these aren't just scattered, isolated incidents. They really seem to be symptoms of a much larger ongoing debate about the very purpose and the very content of education in what is undeniably a diverse and rapidly changing society.
We've covered a lot today, from those evolving, often controversial approaches to gender and race in the curriculum, all the way to specific instances of teacher political expression, religious instruction debate, and these broader accusations of indoctrination.
And the common thread really seems to be this chorus of concerned parents and community members pushing back, demanding transparency, accountability, and a curriculum they feel aligns with their values, or at least maintains neutrality.
Right. And these incidents, collectively, they force us all to confront some really fundamental questions. What values should public education be instilling? How do we possibly ensure a balanced, objective learning environment in such polarized times? And crucially, where do we draw that incredibly difficult line between education, social commentary, and outright ideological influence?
It leaves us with a lot to think about. In this increasingly polarized world, the battles playing out in our classrooms really highlight a profound societal struggle, a struggle, in many ways, for the hearts and minds of the next generation. So the question for you, our listener, might be, what role will you play, or should you play, in shaping this critical conversation about the future of learning? And how might these deep divisions within our schools ultimately impact the very fabric of our communities?